The blood staining the snow behind her left a trail any fool could follow, but Diana Owens had no choice except to keep running because the man she had called husband for 2 miserable years would kill her and the babies if he caught her. The wind howled through the Colorado mountains like a living thing, tearing at her threadbare coat and whipping her dark hair across her face as she stumbled through drifts that came up past her knees. Each step sent pain lancing through her swollen belly, and she knew with a mother's instinct that her time was coming far too soon, weeks before it should, but she could not stop because stopping meant death. The blizzard had started 3 hours ago, just after she had fled the cabin, where Daniel had finally shown his true colors. For months she had endured his drinking, his anger, his fists when the whiskey made him mean, but when he had pressed the barrel of his revolver against her stomach and told her he would not raise another man's bastards, something inside her had snapped. The babies were his, conceived on their wedding night and nurtured in fear ever since, but his paranoia had grown with each passing month until he saw betrayal in every glance, infidelity in every word. She had waited until he passed out drunk, then grabbed what little she could carry and ran into the gathering storm. Now she was lost somewhere in the mountains outside Breckenridge, Colorado, in the winter of 1881, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the fierce determination to protect her unborn children. The temperature had dropped so low that her breath froze in the air, and ice had formed on her eyelashes. Her hands were numb inside her thin gloves, and her feet felt like blocks of wood in her worn boots. She could barely see 5 feet in front of her through the swirling white curtain of snow, and she had long since lost any sense of direction. She only knew she had to keep moving, keep pushing forward, because to stop was to freeze and die. A contraction seized her without warning, doubling her over with a gasp of pain that the wind stole from her lips. She clutched a snow-covered pine tree for support, pressing her forehead against the rough bark as she waited for the pain to pass. When it finally released her, she felt something warm and wet running down her legs, and she knew with absolute certainty that her water had broken. Terror clawed at her throat, but she forced it down and took another step, then another, moving through sheer force of will. The world had narrowed to nothing but snow and pain and the desperate need to find shelter. Her vision was starting to blur at the edges, and she could feel herself growing weaker with each passing minute. Another contraction came, stronger than the first, and she fell to her knees in the snow with a cry that the blizzard swallowed whole. She tried to stand, but her legs would not obey, and she crawled forward instead, leaving red handprints in the pristine white. She did not know how long she crawled. Time had lost all meaning in the white void. All she knew was that she could not stop, would not stop, even as her body screamed for rest and warmth. The babies moved inside her, their movements growing more frantic, and she whispered apologies and promises she did not know if she could keep. She promised them life, promised them safety, promised them a world where they would never know fear or pain. The ground suddenly dropped away beneath her, and she tumbled down a steep embankment, rolling over and over until she came to rest at the bottom in a drift so deep it nearly buried her. She lay there gasping, every part of her body screaming in agony, and she knew she could go no further. This was where she would die, here in this frozen wilderness, and her babies would die with her. The thought filled her with such profound grief that tears froze on her cheeks. Then through the howling wind, she heard something that made no sense. A horse's whinny, sharp and clear. She tried to call out, but her voice was a broken whisper that went nowhere. She tried to move, to wave her arms, but her body would not respond. Another contraction came, this one so powerful that her back arched and a scream finally tore from her throat. That scream saved her life. Thomas Irving had been riding the fence line of his ranch when the blizzard hit, and he had been trying to make it back to his cabin for the past hour. His horse, a sturdy Mustang named Copper, had better sense than he did and kept trying to find shelter. Thomas had learned over his 26 years to trust the animal's instincts, so when Copper suddenly changed direction and headed toward a ravine Thomas did not remember being there, he let the horse have his head. That was when he heard the scream. Thomas had heard many sounds in his years working cattle and horses in the Colorado high country, but he had never heard anything quite like that. It was the sound of pure anguish, of desperation beyond measure, and it cut through the storm like a knife. He urged Copper forward, squinting through the snow, and nearly rode past the dark shape half buried in the drift at the bottom of the ravine. He was off his horse in an instant, sliding down the embankment on his boots, and his heart nearly stopped when he realized it was a woman. She was small and delicate, her face pale as death, her lips blue with cold. Her eyes were closed, and for a terrible moment he thought she was already gone. Then those eyes opened, dark brown and filled with pain and fear and desperate hope, and they fixed on his face. "Please," she whispered. "My babies." Thomas looked down and saw the swell of her belly beneath her inadequate coat, saw the blood in the snow, and understood immediately what was happening. He had helped birth countless foals and calves over the years, but a woman was different, and the fact that she said babies, plural, made everything infinitely more complicated. But there was no doctor within miles, no midwife who could possibly reach them in this storm, and from the way she was gasping and clutching her stomach, there was no time to get her anywhere safe. "I have got you," he said, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "I am going to take care of you." He stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, then lifted her as gently as he could. She was lighter than he expected, too light for a woman carrying twins, and he realized she had probably been starving as well as freezing. Copper stood waiting patiently, and Thomas managed to get into the saddle with the woman cradled against his chest. She whimpered with each movement, and he could feel her body tensing with contractions, even through their layers of clothing. His cabin was still a good 20-minute ride in clear weather, but in this blizzard, it might as well have been on the moon. He needed shelter now, immediately, and he cast his mind back over the landscape he knew like the back of his hand. There was an old line shack about 5 minutes east, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it would have to do. He turned Copper in that direction and rode as fast as he dared through the blinding snow. The woman in his arms was making small sounds of pain now, and he could feel her trembling violently. He bent his head close to hers and spoke in a low, steady voice, the same voice he used to calm frightened horses. "Stay with me now. We are almost there. You are going to be all right. Your babies are going to be all right." He did not know if any of that was true, but he said it anyway because she needed to hear it and because giving up was not in his nature. He had survived losing his parents to cholera when he was 15, survived building a ranch from nothing but determination and sweat, survived harsh winters and dry summers and every other hardship this unforgiving land had thrown at him. He would survive this too, and so would she. The line shack appeared out of the snow like a miracle, a dark square shape against the white. Thomas dismounted carefully and carried the woman to the door, kicking it open with his boot. The interior was pitch black and cold, but at least it blocked the wind. He laid her down as gently as he could on the dirt floor, then went back out into the storm. He led Copper into the shack, not wanting to risk losing his horse to the cold. The space was cramped with the 3 of them inside, but it could not be helped. He stripped the saddle off Copper and used the saddle blanket to make a pallet on the floor, then moved the woman onto it. She was crying now, quiet tears that tracked down her temples, and her hands clutched at her belly. "It hurts," she gasped. "Oh God, it hurts so much." "I know," Thomas said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I know it does. But you are strong. I can see that. You did not make it this far by being weak." He had no lantern, no candle, nothing to make light except the lucifer matches in his pocket. He found an old crate in the corner and broke it apart, then used the wood and some dried grass from the floor to start a small fire near the door where the smoke could escape. The flames cast flickering shadows on the walls and provided barely enough light to see by, but it was better than nothing. The woman had pulled her knees up and was breathing in short, sharp gasps. Thomas knelt beside her and gently pushed her coat open, trying to assess the situation. Her dress was soaked with blood and fluid, and he could see the way her belly tightened and released with each contraction. "What is your name?" he asked, needing to distract her, needing to distract himself. "Diana," she managed between breaths. "Diana Owens. I am Thomas Irving. I have a ranch about 3 miles from here. You are safe now, Diana. I promise you that." She grabbed his hand with surprising strength, her fingers digging into his palm. "If I die, save my babies. Promise me. Promise me you will save them." "You are not going to die," Thomas said firmly. "And neither are your babies. Now listen to me. I have brought plenty of calves and foals into this world, and the principle is the same. Your body knows what to do. You just need to trust it and do what it tells you." Another contraction seized her, and she arched off the blanket with a strangled cry. When it passed, she was panting and sobbing. "It is too soon. They are not supposed to come yet. What if something is wrong? Then we will handle it," Thomas said with a confidence he did not entirely feel. "One problem at a time. Right now, we need to get you through this." He had her remove her lower garments, trying to preserve what little modesty he could in impossible circumstances. The fire provided some warmth, but not nearly enough, and he worried about the babies being born into such cold. He positioned himself where he could see what was happening and tried to remember everything he knew about difficult births. The contractions were coming fast now, one on top of another, and Diana was beyond words. She could only cry out and push when her body demanded it, her face contorted with effort and pain. Thomas kept one hand on her knee and watched, ready to help, praying he would know what to do when the moment came. "I can see the head," he said suddenly, his heart leaping. "Diana, the baby is coming. You need to push." She pushed with everything she had, her whole body straining, and Thomas saw the baby's head crown and then emerge in a rush of fluid and blood. He caught the tiny body in his hands, marveling at how impossibly small and fragile it was. The baby was blue and still, and for a horrible moment Thomas thought it was already dead. Then he remembered what he had seen the midwife do when she delivered his cousin's baby years ago, and he turned the infant over and rubbed its back vigorously. The baby gave a weak cough, then a stronger one, and finally let out a thin, wailing cry that was the most beautiful sound Thomas had ever heard. He wrapped the baby in his shirt, using his teeth to tear strips of fabric to tie off and cut the cord with his knife, which he had heated in the fire. "It is a boy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You have a son, Diana." She reached for the baby with trembling hands, and he placed the tiny bundle against her chest. She looked down at the infant with such love and wonder that it made Thomas's throat tight. But there was no time for celebration. "The second one is coming," Diana gasped, her face going taut with renewed pain. Thomas barely had time to prepare before her body was pushing again. This birth went faster than the first, and within minutes he was catching another slippery, tiny body. This baby was even smaller than the first and did not cry right away. Thomas's hands shook as he repeated the process, rubbing the little back, willing the child to breathe. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, breathe. Breathe." The baby gave a weak gasp, then another, and finally a cry that was more of a mew than a wail. Thomas wrapped this infant in the last dry piece of fabric he could find, part of the saddle blanket, and saw that it was another boy. "Two sons," he said, placing the second baby beside his brother on Diana's chest. "You have two perfect sons." Diana was crying in earnest now, holding her babies close, pressing kisses to their tiny heads. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you. You saved them. You saved us." Thomas sat back on his heels, suddenly aware that he was shaking and covered in blood, and that he had just witnessed the most extraordinary thing in his entire life. These three people had been on the edge of death, and somehow, by the grace of God and sheer stubborn will, they had all survived. But they were not out of danger yet. The babies were far too small and too early, and the cold was still a deadly threat. Diana had lost a lot of blood and was pale and weak. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and Thomas knew they would be trapped in this shack for hours, possibly days. He fed more wood to the fire and positioned Diana and the babies as close to the flames as he dared. Then he lay down beside them and pulled his coat over all four of them, using his body heat to help keep them warm. Copper stood nearby, his bulk providing another windbreak. Diana drifted in and out of consciousness, and Thomas stayed awake, checking on the babies constantly. They were so tiny, so fragile, barely the length of his forearm. Their skin was red and wrinkled, and they made small snuffling sounds as they slept against their mother's skin. He marveled that anything so small could have survived what they had just been through. As the long night wore on and the storm raged outside, Thomas found his gaze returning again and again to Diana's face. Even exhausted and pale, there was a beauty to her, a strength in the set of her jaw, and the way she instinctively curved her body around her babies to protect them. He wondered what circumstances had driven her out into a blizzard in her condition. He wondered if there was a husband somewhere, and felt a strange pang at the thought. He told himself it was only natural concern for a woman who had just been through such an ordeal. He told himself the protectiveness he felt was simply because he had helped bring her children into the world. But somewhere deep inside, in a place he was not quite ready to examine, he knew it was more than that. Dawn came slowly, the light filtering gray and weak through the cracks in the shack's walls. The storm had finally begun to ease, though snow was still falling. Diana woke and immediately checked on her babies, her face flooding with relief when she found them both breathing steadily. "How are you feeling?" Thomas asked. "Sore," she admitted, "and tired, but alive. We are all alive." She looked at him, really looked at him, and he saw her taking in his features for the first time in the light. His dark hair that he kept too long, his strong jaw shadowed with stubble, his gray eyes that his mother had always said could see straight through to a person's soul. "I do not know how to thank you," she said softly. "You did not have to stop. You did not have to help." "Of course I did," Thomas said, surprised she would think otherwise. "What kind of man would I be if I left you out there? Most men would not have known what to do. You saved my babies' lives." "You saved your own life," Thomas said. "You kept going when anyone else would have given up. That is the only reason you are here." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "I had no choice. If I had stayed, we all would have died anyway." There was a story there, Thomas could tell, and not a happy one. But before he could ask, one of the babies began to fuss, making small, hungry sounds. Diana tried to nurse him, fumbling with her dress, and Thomas discreetly turned away to give her privacy. "They are going to need names," he said, staring at the wall. "I know," Diana said, and he heard the smile in her voice. "I had names picked out, but I thought I had more time. I was going to name them after my grandfather and my father." She was quiet for a moment. "Samuel and James. Those are good names, are they not?" "They are fine names," Thomas agreed. "Strong names." "Which is which?" Diana asked, looking down at the two tiny faces. "This one came first," Thomas said, pointing to the baby on the left. "So he is the eldest by about 3 minutes." "Then you are Samuel," Diana said to the first baby. "And you are James." She looked up at Thomas. "Will you remember that? In case something happens to me, I need someone to remember their names." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Thomas said firmly. "But yes, I will remember. Samuel and James." The storm finally blew itself out around midday, leaving the world buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. Thomas knew he needed to get Diana and the babies to somewhere warmer, with proper supplies, but moving them too soon could be just as dangerous as staying in the cold shack. He compromised by riding back to his cabin alone to fetch supplies in his wagon. "I will be back in 2 hours," he promised Diana. 3 at most. Keep the fire going and keep the babies warm. Can you do that?" She nodded, though he could see the fear in her eyes at being left alone. "We will be fine. We have made it this far." The ride back to his cabin seemed to take forever, though Copper made good time through the snow. Thomas's cabin was modest, but well built, with a good stove and a bed and supplies that would make all the difference. He loaded the wagon with blankets and food, with milk from his cow and water from his well, with everything he thought Diana and the babies might need. He hitched Copper to the wagon and drove back to the line shack, his heart not settling until he saw smoke still coming from the doorway and heard the thin cries of the babies inside. Diana looked up when he entered, relief flooding her features. "I thought you might not come back," she admitted. "I gave you my word," Thomas said simply. He scooped her up, babies and all, and carried her to the wagon. He had piled blankets in the bed to make a nest, and he settled her there as gently as if she were made of glass. The journey to his cabin was slow and careful, and by the time they arrived, Diana was gray with exhaustion. Thomas's cabin was one large room with a sleeping loft, simple but clean. He had built it himself 5 years ago when he first claimed his land, and he had always been proud of it. Now he saw it through Diana's eyes and worried it was not enough. But she looked around with something like wonder. "It is warm," she said, "and dry. It is perfect." He settled her in his bed, the only bed, with the babies tucked beside her. He heated water on the stove and found clean cloths so she could wash. He warmed milk for her to drink and made soup from dried beef and vegetables. He did all of this without being asked, moving around his cabin with quiet efficiency while Diana watched with an expression he could not quite read. "You do not have to do all this," she said when he brought her the soup. "You have already done so much." "You just gave birth to twins in a blizzard," Thomas said. "The least I can do is make you some soup." She smiled at that, a real smile that transformed her face and made his chest feel strange and tight. "When you put it that way." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Thomas slept in the loft and gave Diana the bed. He cared for his animals and kept the cabin warm and made sure Diana had everything she needed. He watched her nurse the babies and change them using the soft cloths he provided. He watched her sing to them in a voice that was surprisingly sweet, lullabies he half remembered from his own childhood. The babies were small but healthy, gaining a little weight each day. Samuel was the bigger of the two, the more vocal, always quick to let his displeasure be known. James was quieter, more content to simply watch the world with dark eyes that seemed too wise for someone so new. Diana herself was recovering well, though Thomas could see the nightmares that plagued her sleep and the way she startled at sudden sounds. She never spoke about where she had come from or why she had been running through a blizzard, and Thomas did not push. He figured she would tell him when she was ready, or not at all, and either way was her choice. But as the days turned into a week, he found himself hoping she would never be ready. He found himself hoping she would stay here in his cabin with her babies and her quiet strength and her smile that made him feel like he could do anything. He was falling in love with her, he realized one morning as he watched her through the window, standing in the snow with Samuel in her arms, showing him the mountains. He was falling in love with all three of them, with the little family that had literally fallen into his life out of a storm. He did not know what to do about it. He was not a man who knew fancy words or romantic gestures. He was a cowboy, a rancher, someone more comfortable with horses than people. But he knew honest work and honest feeling. And what he felt for Diana Owens was as honest as the sun rising over the Rockies. The problem was that he did not know if she felt the same. And more than that, he did not know if she was free to feel the same. She still wore a thin gold band on her left hand, and the implication of that was clear enough. One evening, as they sat by the fire after the babies had fallen asleep, Diana finally told him her story. She spoke in a low voice, staring into the flames, and Thomas listened without interrupting. She told him about Daniel, the man she had married at 18, thinking he was her salvation. Her parents had died of influenza, leaving her alone and desperate. Daniel had seemed kind at first, attentive and caring. They had married quickly, and she had thought herself lucky. The mask had come off slowly. First, it was just harsh words when he drank. Then it was a hand, squeezing her arm too tight, leaving bruises. Then it was a slap, just once, followed by tearful apologies. By the time she realized what he truly was, she was pregnant and trapped. He did not want the babies, she said, her voice breaking. He convinced himself they were not his, no matter what I said. He started talking about getting rid of them, about making sure I lost them. And then one night he held a gun to my stomach and said he would save us all the trouble. Thomas's hands clenched into fists, and he had to work to keep his voice level. Where is he now? Back at the cabin, I suppose, if he even bothered to look for me. He was drunk when I left. He might not even remember what he said. She looked at Thomas, her eyes bright with tears. I am still married to him. In the eyes of the law, I am his property. If he finds me, he can take me back. He can take my babies. No, Thomas said, and the single word came out like a vow. That will not happen. I will not let it happen. You cannot stop him, Diana said miserably. The law is on his side. Then the law is wrong, Thomas said fiercely. And I do not give a damn what the law says. No one is taking you or those babies anywhere you do not want to go. Diana stared at him, something shifting in her expression. Why are you doing this? Why do you care what happens to us? Thomas took a breath and said the truest thing he knew. Because from the moment I found you in that snow, you became mine to protect, and I do not give up what is mine. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Diana's eyes widened and color rose in her cheeks. Thomas, I cannot ask you to fight my battles. I cannot ask you to put yourself at risk for me. You are not asking, Thomas said. I am offering. There is a difference. She looked down at her hands, twisting the gold band on her finger. Then slowly, deliberately, she pulled it off and tossed it into the fire. They both watched as it glowed red and then began to melt. He stopped being my husband when he chose whiskey and cruelty over his family, Diana said quietly. I am done being his wife. I am done being afraid. Thomas felt something unlock in his chest, something he had not even realized was tight and bound. What will you do? I do not know, Diana admitted. I have no money, no family, nowhere to go. I do not even know if divorce is possible, but I cannot go back. I will die before I go back. Then stay, Thomas said, the words coming out before he could stop them. Stay here, you and the babies. Stay with me. Diana's head came up, her eyes searching his face. Thomas, you do not know what you are saying. You would be taking on a woman with 2 infants, a woman who is still legally married to someone else. Your reputation would be ruined. I do not care about my reputation, Thomas said. I care about you. I care about Samuel and James. These past 2 weeks, having you here, it has felt right in a way nothing else ever has. This cabin was always just a place to sleep before. Now it feels like a home. You barely know me, Diana whispered, but there was hope in her voice, bright and fragile as a candle flame. I know you are brave and strong and fierce when it comes to protecting what you love, Thomas said. I know you sing lullabies off key and that you take your coffee with too much sugar. I know you make me want to be a better man than I am. I know I want to wake up every morning and see you holding your babies in the sunlight. Is that not enough? Tears were streaming down Diana's face now, but she was smiling. It is more than enough. It is everything. But Thomas, I do not want you to feel obligated. You saved my life, you saved my children, but that does not mean you have to take care of us forever. This is not obligation, Thomas said. He moved closer, taking her hands in his. Diana, I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since the moment I heard you scream in that blizzard and every moment since. I want you to stay not because I feel like I have to take care of you, but because the thought of you leaving makes me feel like someone is carving out my heart with a dull knife. Diana let out a laugh that was half sob. I am falling in love with you too. I have been trying not to, telling myself it was too soon, that I was just grateful, that I should not feel this way, but I cannot help it. When you hold James and you get that look on your face, like he is the most precious thing in the world, when you check on Samuel in the middle of the night to make sure he is still breathing, when you smile at me like you are right now, I fall a little more in love with you. Thomas felt like he could not breathe, like the world had suddenly become impossibly bright and clear. Then marry me. When the time is right, when we can figure out the legal aspects, marry me. Be my wife. Let me be a father to Samuel and James. Let me give you all the life you deserve. Yes, Diana said, and the word came out fierce and sure. Yes, Thomas Irving, I will marry you. He kissed her then, gentle and careful because she had only given birth 2 weeks ago, and he did not want to hurt her. But the kiss was full of promise, full of all the things he did not have words for. When they broke apart, they were both smiling. I have never proposed to anyone before, Thomas said. I hope I did it all right. It was perfect, Diana assured him. Though I should warn you, I come with a lot of baggage. 2 babies, a husband I need to legally separate from somehow, no possessions to speak of, and absolutely no idea how to run a ranch. Good thing I know how to run a ranch then, Thomas said. And Samuel and James are not baggage. They are a blessing. As for the rest, we will figure it out together. And they did. It was not easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But they worked at it day by day, building a life together in that cabin in the Colorado mountains. Thomas rode into Breckenridge and found a lawyer willing to help Diana petition for divorce on grounds of desertion and cruelty. It would take time, possibly years, but the lawyer was optimistic. In the meantime, Diana lived as Thomas's ward, which was respectable enough to keep the gossips at bay. Daniel never came looking for her. Thomas made quiet inquiries and learned that the man had died 3 months after Diana fled, frozen in a snowbank, after a night of heavy drinking. The news should have brought Diana relief, but instead it just made her sad. He was not always a monster, she said when Thomas told her. Something broke in him, I think. Maybe the war, maybe something before. I will never know. But I am sorry he is dead. I am sorry he never got the chance to be the man he could have been. Thomas held her while she cried for the husband who had never really been a husband, for the life that might have been different, for all the wasted chances and lost possibilities. And when the tears were done, they looked forward instead of back. Samuel and James grew strong and healthy despite their early arrival. By the time spring came and the snow melted, they were thriving. 2 beautiful babies with their mother's dark eyes and their father's features, though Thomas tried not to see that. He tried to see only that they were his sons in every way that mattered. He taught Diana how to ride and how to work cattle. She took to it with surprising aptitude, fearless on horseback and quick to learn. She also took over the cabin, transforming it from a bachelor's sparse dwelling into a real home with curtains on the windows and flowers in a vase and the constant wonderful noise of babies. They were careful about propriety. Diana slept in the bed downstairs and Thomas stayed in the loft. They did not touch beyond casual friendly contact, did not kiss again like they had that night by the fire. It was torture, especially as the months passed and Diana grew more beautiful with each passing day, her body recovering, her confidence returning, her smiles coming easier and more often. But Thomas had given his word that he would respect her, that he would wait until she was legally free and until she was ready. And his word meant everything. So he waited and loved her from a distance and tried not to think about what it would be like when she was finally his in truth. Summer came, hot and bright, and the ranch thrived. Thomas had a small herd of cattle and a string of good horses, and the work kept him busy from dawn to dusk. Diana helped where she could, the baby strapped to her back in a sling she had fashioned from old blankets. More than once, Thomas would look up from his work to see her walking through the meadow with the boys, showing them flowers or birds or clouds, and his heart would nearly burst with love. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset over the mountains, Diana said, "I received a letter from the lawyer today." Thomas tensed. What did it say? With Daniel's death, the legal situation has simplified considerably. I am legally a widow now, free to remarry without need of divorce proceedings. She looked at him, her eyes bright in the fading light. I am free, Thomas. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but now that it was here, words failed him. Diana, he finally managed. I know we agreed to wait, she said quickly. And if you have changed your mind, if you have realized that taking on a woman with 2 babies is more than you bargained for, I understand. But if you still want to marry me, if you still want us, then I am ready. I am more than ready. Thomas was out of his chair in an instant, pulling her up and into his arms. Changed my mind? Diana Owens, I have been half out of my head waiting for this day. I love you more now than I did 6 months ago, and I loved you impossibly much then. Yes, I still want to marry you. I want it more than I want my next breath. She laughed and kissed him, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. This time the kiss was full of promise and passion and all the waiting they had endured. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. When? Diana asked. When can we get married? Tomorrow, Thomas said immediately. Today. Right now. Whenever you want. There is a circuit preacher who comes through Breckenridge once a month, Diana said. He is due next week. We could do it then properly, with a witness and a certificate and everything legal. Next week, Thomas agreed, though a week suddenly seemed like an eternity. I will ride into town tomorrow and make the arrangements. The week that followed was the longest of Thomas's life. He cleaned the cabin from top to bottom. He built a bigger bed that would hold the 2 of them comfortably. He bought fabric in town and asked the dressmaker to make Diana a new dress, something pretty and special for her wedding day. He bought a ring, simple gold because it was all he could afford, but chosen with care from the general store. Diana spent the week in a state of nervous excitement, preparing food for a small celebration and fussing over what to do with her hair. The babies sensed their mother's happiness and were content and giggly, grabbing at everything with their fat little hands. The wedding took place on a Wednesday morning in the small church in Breckenridge. There were only a handful of people present besides the preacher, the lawyer who had helped Diana, the dressmaker who had become her friend, and a neighboring rancher Thomas sometimes traded with. But it was perfect. Diana wore her new dress, a simple design in pale blue that brought out her eyes. She had woven wildflowers into her dark hair, and she carried Samuel in one arm and James in the other as she walked down the aisle. Thomas stood at the front in his best clothes, his hair slicked back, his hands shaking slightly as he watched her approach. When she reached him, she handed each baby to a guest, so her hands were free. Thomas took her hands in his, and they stood facing each other as the preacher began the ceremony. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Thomas Irving and Diana Owens in holy matrimony. If anyone here present has just cause why these 2 should not be wed, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. Silence. Thomas had halfway expected Daniel's ghost to materialize and object, but nothing happened. The preacher smiled and continued. Marriage is a sacred bond, a promise made before God, and witnesses that 2 people will love and honor each other all the days of their lives. Thomas, do you take Diana to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death do you part? I do, Thomas said, his voice clear and strong. Diana, do you take Thomas to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death do you part? I do, Diana said, tears shimmering in her eyes. The rings. Thomas pulled out the simple gold band and slid it onto Diana's finger. It fit perfectly. Diana had found her grandmother's ring among the few possessions she had brought with her, and she slid it onto Thomas's finger with shaking hands. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Thomas cupped Diana's face in his hands and kissed her softly, tenderly, aware of all the eyes watching them. But mostly he was aware of her, of the way she kissed him back with all the love and trust and hope they had built together over the past 7 months. When they broke apart, there were tears on both their faces. The celebration afterward was small but joyful. They ate cake and drank coffee and accepted the congratulations of their few friends. Samuel and James were passed from person to person, cooed over and admired. And through it all, Thomas and Diana kept looking at each other, hardly able to believe that this was real, that they were truly married, that their life together was finally beginning in earnest. The ride back to the ranch seemed to take forever, but finally they were home. Thomas carried Diana over the threshold, babies and all, and set her down gently in the middle of their cabin. They're home. Welcome home, Mrs. Irving, he said. I like the sound of that, Diana said, smiling up at him. Mrs. Irving, Diana Irving. It has a good ring to it. That night, after the babies were asleep in the cradle Thomas had built, he and Diana finally came together as husband and wife in truth. It was tender and sweet, and full of all the love they had been holding back for months. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their new bed, and Diana traced patterns on Thomas's chest. I cannot believe this is my life, she said quietly. 7 months ago, I was dying in the snow. Now I am married to the most wonderful man in the world. My babies are healthy and happy, and I am home. Actually home for the first time in my life. You saved yourself, Thomas reminded her. You fought and refused to give up. All I did was help. You did more than help, Diana said. You gave me a reason to keep fighting. You gave me a future worth surviving for. You gave me love when I thought I would never be loved again. That is everything, Thomas. That is the whole world. He kissed her forehead, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. So instead, he just held her close and listened to her breathing, even out, as she fell asleep. He lay awake long into the night, watching the moonlight paint silver patterns on the walls, marveling at the strange and wonderful path his life had taken. The years that followed were not always easy. Ranching was hard work, and money was often tight. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and broken fences, all the challenges that came with living in the Colorado high country. But through it all, they had each other. Samuel and James grew into sturdy, bright boys who were inseparable. They learned to ride before they could properly walk, and they followed Thomas around the ranch like puppies, eager to help with any task. Diana taught them their letters and numbers, reading to them every night from the small collection of books she slowly accumulated. 3 years after the wedding, Diana found herself pregnant again. This time it was planned, hoped for, and celebrated. And this time there was no danger, no drama, just a healthy pregnancy that ended with the birth of a daughter they named Rose. Rose had her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes, and she had both of them wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. Samuel and James were instantly protective of their baby sister, hovering over her cradle and bringing her flowers and generally making nuisances of themselves in the most endearing way possible. 2 years after Rose came another son, whom they named Matthew. And 2 years after Matthew came twin girls, Anna and Grace, who Diana delivered without complications under the care of Breckenridge's new doctor. The cabin that had once seemed spacious for one man was bursting at the seams with 7 children, so Thomas built an addition, then another. The ranch grew too, as Thomas's reputation for good horses spread and buyers came from as far away as Denver to purchase his stock. Diana blossomed in her role as wife and mother. The frightened, battered woman Thomas had found in the snow was gone, replaced by someone confident and strong and full of laughter. She ran their household with efficient grace, kept their books, managed their supplies, and somehow found time to tend a garden that was the envy of every other ranch wife in the territory. Thomas watched his children grow and marveled that they were his, that this extraordinary life was his. Samuel, serious and responsible, took after his mother with his quick mind and gentle heart. James, always laughing, had a gift with animals that surpassed even Thomas's own. Rose was fierce and independent, refusing to be left behind when her brothers went out to work. Matthew was the dreamer, always looking at the mountains and wondering what lay beyond. And the twins, Anna and Grace, were mischievous and inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into trouble at every opportunity. One evening, when Samuel and James were 12 and already taller than their mother, Thomas sat on the porch with Diana and watched the sunset. The children were all playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening air. "Do you ever regret it?" Diana asked suddenly. Thomas looked at her in surprise. "Regret what?" "Any of it. Stopping that day. Taking us in. Marrying me. All of this." She gestured at the chaos of children, the sprawling ranch, the life they had built. Thomas took her hand and raised it to his lips. "Not for one single second. You and these children are the best thing that ever happened to me. I was just existing before you. Now I am living." Even when the twins put a frog in Matthew's bed. "Even then," Thomas said, grinning, "though I could have done without the screaming at 2 a.m. Diana laughed and leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Thomas Irving. I love you more than I can possibly say." "I love you too," Thomas said. "Every day more than the day before. You are my heart, Diana. You and our children. You are everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. Samuel was teaching Rose how to throw a lasso. James was trying to catch one of the barn cats. Matthew was lying on his back in the grass, staring at the clouds. The twins were whispering together, planning some new mischief, no doubt. "We did all right, did not we?" Diana said softly. "We did better than all right," Thomas said. "We built something beautiful, something that will last long after we are gone." And it did. Years later, when Thomas was an old man with silver in his hair and Diana's hair had gone gray, they would sit on that same porch and watch their grandchildren play in the yard. Samuel had married and taken over running the ranch with his younger brothers. James had become one of the finest horse trainers in Colorado. Rose had married a school teacher and opened a school in Breckenridge. Matthew had become a surveyor, mapping the mountains he had always loved. Anna and Grace had opened a dress shop together, inseparable to the end. The ranch that Thomas had built alone had become a family legacy, passed down through generations. The cabin that had sheltered a desperate woman and her newborn babies had been added onto and improved until it was a sprawling ranch house filled with love and laughter. And through it all, at the center of everything, were Thomas and Diana, the cowboy who had found a woman dying in a blizzard and refused to let her go, the woman who had run through a storm to save her babies and found not just survival, but love beyond measure. On Thomas's 70th birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren, he stood and raised his glass in a toast. "To Diana," he said, his voice still strong despite his years, "the bravest woman I have ever known, the love of my life, the mother of my children, my partner in all things. I found you in a blizzard, and you brought sunshine into my life. Here is to 50 more years together." 50 more years, Diana echoed, her eyes bright with tears and love. "Though I think that might be pushing it a bit, my love." "Then we will take whatever time God gives us," Thomas said, "and be grateful for every moment." They lived another 15 years together, growing old side by side, still in love after all that time. When Thomas passed in his sleep at 85, Diana held his hand and whispered all the things she had been telling him for 53 years: that she loved him, that he had saved her, that he was the best man she had ever known. She followed him 6 months later, unable to live without her other half. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the Colorado sky they had both loved so much. Their children told their children the story of how Thomas and Diana met, and those children told their children until it became part of family legend. The cowboy who found a woman in a blizzard, the woman who was brave enough to run through a storm to save her babies, the love that grew from desperation and survival into something that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The ranch still stands today, run by Thomas and Diana's descendants. And if you walk through the old cemetery on the hill, you can find two headstones side by side with a simple inscription: Thomas Irving, 1855-1940. Diana Irving, 1857-1940. Together in life, together in eternity. And if the wind is right and you listen carefully, you might hear the echo of laughter, the sound of children playing, the quiet murmur of two people who loved each other beyond measure. Because some love stories do not end with death. Some love stories are so powerful, so true, that they echo through the generations forever. This is one of those stories. The story of a cowboy and a woman he found in a blizzard. The story of two babies born in impossible circumstances who grew into fine men. The story of a family built on love and trust, and the stubborn refusal to give up even when all hope seemed lost. It is a true Western love story, as enduring as the mountains, as constant as the stars. And it all began with a scream in a blizzard and a man who refused to ride past someone in need. Samuel and James Irving, those twin boys born in a line shack during a blizzard, grew up never knowing they had a different biological father. Thomas never told them, and Diana never told them, because it did not matter. Thomas was their father in every way that counted, from teaching them to ride to showing them how to be good men. The twins had families of their own, and they told their children about the night they were born, about how their father had saved their mother's life and delivered them both in the middle of a snowstorm. They told it as a love story, because that is what it was. Rose Irving married a kind man and had 3 children. Matthew became known throughout Colorado for his maps and surveys. Anna and Grace never married, preferring to run their business and live together, happy in their independence and each other's company. All of them, every single one of Thomas and Diana's children, learned the lesson their parents had taught them through example, that love is not just a feeling, but a choice, made every day in 1,000 small ways. That family is not always about blood, but about who shows up, who stays, who chooses you, and keeps choosing you. The ranch prospered through the years, even through hard times. When the economy crashed, when droughts came, when winters were brutal, the Irving family endured because they had each other and because they never forgot where they came from. The original line shack where Samuel and James were born was preserved, kept standing long after it should have fallen down. It became a family shrine of sorts, a reminder of that desperate night when everything could have gone wrong but somehow went right. Diana would sometimes walk there on the anniversary of the twins' birth, standing in the small space and remembering the pain and the fear and the bone-deep certainty that she was going to die. Remembering Thomas's steady voice telling her she was going to be all right. Remembering the first thin cries of her babies and the overwhelming relief of survival. Thomas would find her there, year after year, and he would take her hand without saying anything. They would stand together in that small shack that had witnessed a miracle, and they would remember how they found each other. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren, Diana stood and gave a speech that had everyone in tears. 50 years ago, she said, her voice clear despite her age, I was running for my life through a blizzard. I was pregnant and alone and certain I was going to die. I had given up hope. I had accepted that my babies and I would freeze in the snow, and no one would ever know what became of us. She paused, looking around at all the faces watching her. But then I heard a horse, and then I heard a voice, and then I looked up and saw this man, this cowboy, who had no reason to stop, who could have so easily kept riding. But he did not. He stopped, he helped, he saved us. She turned to Thomas, tears streaming down her face. You gave me my life back that night, Thomas Irving. You gave my babies their lives. But more than that, you gave me love. You gave me a home. You gave me 50 years of happiness I never thought I would have. Every single day I wake up grateful that you were riding that fence line, grateful that you heard me scream, grateful that you are the kind of man who stops. Thomas stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her close while their family applauded and cried and celebrated the love that had started in such desperate circumstances and grown into something extraordinary. The party went on late into the night, with music and dancing and stories told around the fire. The grandchildren begged to hear the story again, the famous story of how Grandma and Grandpa met, and even though they had heard it 100 times, they listened with rapt attention as Thomas told it once more. He told them about the blizzard and the scream and finding Diana half buried in the snow. He told them about delivering the twins in the line shack with nothing but firelight and determination. He told them about falling in love with their grandmother, about waiting to marry her, about building this life together one day at a time. The best decision I ever made, he said at the end, was to not ride past, to stop and help, because stopping gave me everything I have. This ranch, this family, this life. All of it started because I chose to stop. The younger children asked what the lesson was, and Thomas smiled. The lesson is that you never know when the most important moment of your life is happening. It might be in the middle of a blizzard when you are cold and tired and just want to get home. It might be when stopping is inconvenient and difficult. But if you are the kind of person who stops anyway, who helps anyway, who does the right thing even when it is hard, then you open yourself up to miracles. He looked at Diana, still beautiful to him after 50 years. And your grandmother was my miracle. She still is every single day. As the years went on and Thomas and Diana grew older, they spent more and more time on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, holding hands and remembering. They talked about their life together, about all the joys and sorrows, all the triumphs and struggles. They talked about the children they had raised and the grandchildren who filled their days with noise and laughter. They talked about the ranch and how it had grown and changed. They talked about the love they shared, how it had deepened and matured over the decades. I would do it all again, Diana said one evening, near the end. Every single moment, good and bad. I would run through that blizzard again if it meant finding you at the end. I would ride that fence line every day for the rest of my life if it meant finding you every time, Thomas replied. They sat in comfortable silence. These two people who had been through so much together, who had built such a beautiful life from such desperate beginnings. The sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, and somewhere in the distance they could hear their great-grandchildren playing. We did good, did we not? Diana asked, the same question she had asked so many times over the years. We did better than good, Thomas said, the same answer he always gave. We did extraordinary. And they had. Against all odds, despite everything that could have gone wrong, they had built a love story for the ages. A story that began in a blizzard and ended only when death parted them, and even then, not really, because love like theirs never truly ends. It lives on in the children they raised, in the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carry their blood and their values. It lives on in the ranch they built together, in the land they tended and loved. It lives on in the story that is still told of the cowboy who found a woman in the snow and loved her for the rest of his life, When Thomas and Diana passed within months of each other, unable to live without their other half, the family gathered for a double funeral. They mourned, but they also celebrated, because what was there to mourn really? Two people who had lived long, full lives. Two people who had loved deeply and been loved in return. Two people who had left behind a legacy that would continue for generations. The preacher who conducted the service told the story again of how they met, because it was impossible to talk about Thomas and Diana Irving without telling that story. It was the foundation of everything, the moment when two lives collided and changed each other forever. Love like this is rare, the preacher said. Love that starts in such desperate circumstances and grows into something so beautiful. Love that lasts through 53 years of marriage, through raising 7 children, through building a life from nothing. Love that only ends when death claims first one and then the other, unable to bear separation. He looked out at the crowd, at the many faces who had been touched by Thomas and Diana's love. We should all be so lucky as to find a love like this. A love that saves us, that changes us, that makes us better than we were. Thomas and Diana found that in each other, and they shared it generously with everyone around them. That is their legacy. That is what they leave behind. They were buried on the hill as they had wished, overlooking the ranch they had built together. And as the sun set that evening, painting the sky in brilliant golds and reds and purples, it seemed fitting, beautiful endings for beautiful lives. The ranch continued under Samuel's management, then under his sons and then his grandsons. Each generation added their own touch, but kept the core of what Thomas and Diana had built. The values they had instilled remained: hard work, honesty, helping those in need, family above all else. The line shack was eventually moved to the main ranch house property and preserved as a historical site. A plaque was placed there, telling the story of the night the twins were born, the night Thomas Irving delivered 2 babies in a blizzard and fell in love with their mother. Tourists sometimes stopped to see it, this small piece of Western history. They read the plaque and look at the old photographs displayed inside, pictures of Thomas and Diana through the years, pictures of their children and grandchildren, pictures of the life they built together. And if those tourists are lucky, someone from the Irving family might be there, might tell them the story in person. They tell it the way it has always been told, as a love story, because that is what it is at its heart. Not just a story about survival, though it is that. Not just a story about birth in desperate circumstances, though it is that too. But primarily, fundamentally, a story about love, about how love can bloom in the most unlikely places, about how love can save you, change you, give you reasons to keep fighting when everything seems hopeless, about how love, real love, true love, lasts beyond death and echoes through generations. The Irving family still owns the ranch today, 7 generations after Thomas first claimed the land. They still tell the story of Thomas and Diana, still keep alive the memory of the cowboy who found a woman in a blizzard and loved her forever. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howls through the Colorado mountains and snow blankets the ground, they say you can sometimes see 2 figures on the hill where Thomas and Diana are buried. 2 people holding hands, looking out over the ranch they built, watching over the family they created. It is probably just a trick of the light, just shadows and snow and imagination. But the Irving family likes to think it is real. They like to think that Thomas and Diana are still there, still together, still watching over the legacy they left behind. Because love like that does not just end. It cannot. It is too powerful, too true, too deep. It becomes part of the land itself, soaked into the soil, carried on the wind, written in the stones and the trees and the very air. This is the story of Thomas and Diana Irving, the cowboy and the woman he found in a blizzard, the twins born in a line shack in the middle of a snowstorm, the family that grew from such desperate beginnings into something magnificent. It is a story about survival and birth and love and life. It is a Western love story, true in every sense of the word. And it is a story that will be told as long as the Irving family endures, passed down from generation to generation, a reminder of where they came from and what really matters. In the end, that is what endures. Not wealth or fame or power, not even the ranch itself, though it has lasted 7 generations so far. What endures is love, the love Thomas and Diana shared with each other and with their children, the love that saved them both and gave them the most extraordinary life. That love echoes still in every sunset over the Colorado mountains, in every child born to the Irving family, in every story told around the fire on cold winter nights. It echoes in the very bones of the ranch, in the hills and valleys that Thomas and Diana called home. And it all started with one choice, one decision made in the middle of a blizzard, the decision to stop, to help, to care about a stranger's life more than his own comfort. Thomas Irving made that choice, and it changed everything. It saved Diana and her babies. It gave him a family and a love beyond measure. It created a legacy that has lasted more than 140 years and shows no signs of ending. So remember, the story says, remember that your choices matter. Remember that stopping to help someone in need might just be the most important thing you ever do. Remember that love can bloom in the most unlikely places, at the most desperate times, and grow into something that lasts forever. Remember Thomas and Diana Irving, the cowboy, and the woman he found in a blizzard, and the love story that began with a scream in the snow and ended only when death claimed them both, unable to live without each other. Remember and know that love like this is possible. Love that saves, love that endures, love that echoes through generations, love that is worth running through a blizzard for, love that is worth stopping for, even when it is inconvenient, even when it is hard, love that is worth everything. This is their story. This is their legacy. And this is how love is supposed to be.